Hello, hello. We're going to give it just like a minute or two, and then we can go ahead and start. Hey, what up, Darcy? Hello to you. Would love for everyone that's starting to join this chat, just tell us where you're from. Okay, Gloves calling from NYC. I already know that. That's boring news. PEI Canada. Great. Now we're international. Love that. All right, I'm gonna give it until the 3-minute mark, and then I'll get straight into the swing of things. All right, folks. All right, beautiful. I think we've hit critical mass. Let's just get the show on the road. My name is Sung, rhymes with lung, like the air you breathe. I'm ecstatic to be here. I always love doing these things, even though I've done these a dozen times over. It's just such a delight just to meet people here, just because I'm a raging extrovert. But overall, the agenda today is just to go through a day in the life of if you had diffing as a normal part of your workflow and just Datafold as a normal part of your workflow. And Leo's going to be the chat mod for today's session. And so if you have any questions, he's going to answer them async, and he's going to shout out to me if it makes more sense for me to address it live on this call. And then we're going to leave time for questions towards the end. But really, this is a chance for you to imagine, do I want to work like Sung is working right now? And if you do, would love to hear some accolades for that. If not, complain to us. We want to hear that conversation. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to wear my hat of hey, I am a data engineer, analytics engineer, data analyst, and I am making a pull request today. This is assuming I'm using things like GitHub and Snowflake and dbt. All right. So with that in mind, here is what my role and feeling looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Give me a moment. I have to organize some stuff. All right. And I'm going to share this. Beautiful. And now you should see VS Code in front of you. Beautiful. Yep. Okay. I'm going to increase the size. So step one is today I am making a really big pull request. And what I'm trying to do is make sure hey, beforehand, I was not categorizing, what's it called? I was not categorizing individual users correctly when I'm selling this hypothetical, software for the company that I'm working at. And I just want to make some changes. I have some inherent tribal knowledge around this dbt code base. And so this doesn't feel too intimidating to me, right? I'm I'm switching up this ref. I was using the signed in table versus the org created. This makes more sense. And then let me just add these categories, right? From there, I'm going to probably do something like preview this using the Power User extension, getting a look and feel for the data. I'm okay, this kind of makes sense. I'd probably do something like dbt, run s dim orgs to see how everything feels. And yep, everything passes. I'm in a rush right now, right? So I'm probably not going to test this right now. But I'm still at the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, what is the shape of my data, right? Because it's you get to a certain point where green check marks hit their ceiling, and you just need to see a clear before and after story, right? That's where, even with open source today, you can use a command that looks like this after you pip install data div. What we'll do is it'll pick up the latest DBT run results to know what to diff in the first place. It'll also take a look at the configs that you set up here, and bam, you get a full kind of just summary report of, hey, here are the rows added, removed, here's what changed, here's what did not, and just the values updated as a result. But now I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, like this is good directional guidance, but I actually need to see the value level differences. I don't want to have to keep eyeballing preview results to make sense of what's going on, right? That's where you don't have to live that game. If you use our native integration with our open source utility, it automatically kicks off a diff. And over here, you should see my screen with a diff that looks like this. And essentially, I get a very similar summary report that you saw earlier, but here's where the real meat and potatoes are. A full value level diff, no guessing games, very similar to a Git diff that you know and love. Column A is prod, column B is dev, moving on with my life. And that's it. And over here, I also noticed a couple other things where I was like, oh, hey, here's the dependencies tab. That's not part of open source. And that's because we have something that looks like this. So you have context of like, hey, like what matters ultimately is like not that this table looks good, but that my end users are getting the results that they care about. And I'm going to touch upon this a little bit later here, but just wanted to tease this now because this just brings extra contextual awareness to go like, oh, hey, I'm developing a model that's really, really important and is a single point of failure for a lot of downstream data app objects, whether it be high touch or Looker or Tableau. And so I'm going to keep an eye out for that. I'm probably going to click around here and see how column level lineage is impacted there. But again, I'll touch on that later when it comes to the CI process. Now, when I look at this, I'm like, hey, this is really cool. I get a lot of great results out of this. But now I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, like I want this to be part of a pull request, right? And so what's really nice is we thought of that. And going through the same workflow that you saw earlier is, hey, I update these two DBT models. I have a GitHub action, or if you use DBT Cloud today, I get a nice green check mark. And I also get a summary report with Datafold as well. And so very similar summary stats. We add a bit more fidelity here. Even Datafold is enterprise software. And you get a nice like kind of data app dependency report as well. And then from there, you get to go through that same workflow where I click on that link, get to see the overview report, get to see the values tab. I also get to see medium level detail, right? Because I'm like, hey, I made a big update to this subplan field. And I want to understand like the distribution of changes for that particular category. And now at a glance, I get that. And I get to move on with my life. From there, I think to myself, hey, I get these full level of dependencies. I made a big change to the subplan field. And I get to see at a glance like, hey, this is how it's impacting all these relevant data objects. But now I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, like this is a nice tabular format, really gives me some directional guidance, but I want to see something in a graphical interface because that's my mental model for understanding lineage. That's where we thought of you. And you just click that button and we'll take you to the exact view that you saw earlier. No guessing games. And so this full column level lineage happens here. And if you're like, hey, I want to see just like overall things, not just that selected path, you can do that too. And I go over here. I want to see, hey, how's created app looking and feeling? Oh, great. Cool. I get to move on from there. From there, I think to myself, hey, how is sub price being flowed through? Bam, just like that. Now, when I think to myself, like, hey, like, who do I need to talk to and why? Who do I not need to talk to? I can have a much more intelligent starting point for that conversation versus opening up what I did for like the past 7 years of my data engineering career, open up 5 tabs, have like 2 DMs ready, and like being ready to like context switch 10 times in a row for 30 minutes. And that's just testing for one table. Right? You notice how through this whole exercise from development to CI, it only took like 5 minutes. And that's the point, right? It's automating a lot of the plumbing and the context switching and the toil. So you just get to like shape the data clay that you know and love, right? And so that's that CI piece. Now I'm thinking to myself like, hey, like there are really important like replication use cases we have. And so this is pretty common amongst the customers and prospects we talk with is, hey, like I'm replicating things from Postgres into Snowflake. So because we're selling software, we use Postgres as our web backend, pretty common, and we want to replicate that using CDC or 5chan or what have you into Snowflake for analytics, because we don't want to overburden our transactional database with analytical queries, right? Makes sense. But a lot of the times you just kind of have to fingers crossed, hope and pray that the data loaders, whether they're kind of out of the box or you build it using Python scripts, that there's actual consistency. You're kind of just like using either row counts or just hoping for the best. And we think you shouldn't have to live in that reality. That's where we have the notion of cross-database diffing. And so I'll actually even show you this very specific example where all I have to do here is just select the data source, pick the data set, just name the data base schema and table name or view name. I can even use custom queries if I want to. I get to pick a primary key between the two. If I'm like, hey, Sung, I don't have primary keys, we thought of you. You can just construct it on the fly and we'll create that composite key on your behalf. And then from there, I say, hey, after 1,000 diffs, stop it. I want to move on from there and do some debugging. Most of the time, you want this to be a low number because you want them to be apples to apples. From there, I pick the columns and scope that I want to diff and then run it. And then I get results that look and feel like this. And then from there, I get to see, hey, here are the value level diffs I know and love. And that's about it. And what's really nice too is like, hey, I want this on a schedule now. That's where you can. So I'm going to create something called a monitor where it replicates all the settings so I don't have to copy and paste anything. And I essentially get to say, hey, if I see more than 10 rows that are different, send me an email or a Slack alert. Hey, if I see more than 10% of my rows are different, send me an email or Slack alert. And now you're probably wondering, hey, what's the formula or math to understand this? You just have to hover over the tooltip and we give you that straight arithmetic in order to understand, hey, how exactly are we calculating these numbers to even send you an email or Slack alert in the first place? And that's it when it comes to doing this. And what's just really nice about this is like, you notice how this whole exercise here, it's not asking you to do this like 40-minute, like, look how cool my code is kind of exercise. It's, hey, let's automate the boring stuff for you so you can move on to do the stuff you actually love and care about, right? And in addition to that, if you're in the middle of a migration, we've seen some people go from like Databricks to Snowflake and vice versa, right? And so you can do that as well across some of the modern data warehouse players. And now if you're thinking to yourself like, hey, I have an important migration use case and the SQL doesn't translate apples to apples. I want to do things like on the fly when I'm like running these diffs and querying things, like how do I translate them neatly? That's where, if you're using this feature, you can also use it in tandem with our SQL translator. And that's where I'm like, I have two things that look like this. And I'm like, hey, I want, I don't have a query off the top, but I'm like, hey, I just want to translate this. If you have like, Databricks native functions that can translate nicely to Snowflake ones, we'll do that on your behalf. We'll copy to clipboard. You can go back to the data diffs. You can go back here, clone it. I want to look at the queries again and copy and paste a bunch of things, right? And even in that whole workflow, you don't have to switch over to VS Code or run a little utility on the side. It's all within the same Datafold platform. And what I love about this is it's really empathetic to the fact that what makes the data engineering craft so hard is just the thousands of paper cuts along the way that bog you down. And, going through the manual equivalent of this exercise, you may do that maybe 20 times in a row of, going through 30-minute exercises per diffs, but you're probably not going to do that 50 times in a row, 100 times in a row over years. And we want to make sure diffing is something that you just love doing and just kind of like just becomes a normal part of your muscle memory just because it is so easy. And so, yeah, that is about it for the demo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and would love to open the floor for questions. And so I'm going to look at the chat right now and take it from there. All right, cool. So Leo said chat mom, not chat mod. Okay, cool. Let's see. Is there sound now? Okay, so this looks like it's a Geno-specific issue. Yeah, thanks for your patience on that. Beautiful, Geno. Glad that fixed it. Would this support non-SQL data source, i.e. Cassandra? That's a great question. We've actually talked with a couple people that were interested in things like, hey, like we want to replicate things from MongoDB into things like Snowflake, and because we want to use that for analytics. And so things like NoSQL databases are in a roadmap, but in the short term on a roadmap is just like adding more transactional to modern data warehouse kind of backends to solve for a lot of that pressing pain. Well, any other questions here? I guess maybe a question for the crowd here. Just like a quick bullet, like what of what I showed you really resonated with you? Okay, nice. Darcy said the DBT integration looks pretty slick. Glad to hear it. Cool. Anyone else? If not, Leo, I want to invite you to the stage, and we can turn this into, a fireside chat format. And yeah, we'll take it from there.
All right. Well, it's me, the chat mom. And I see, so thanks, Sung, for kicking this off. I'm welcome to run through that. So I see Jeff typing. I guess I think it's might be worth just kind of talking through like some of the scenarios we have encountered, in particular for some of that cross-database diffing functionality that I was waxing eloquent about in the chat. I wonder if, without mentioning any particular customers, obviously, but like I know, Sung, you've been working with a few new customers who are, making really heavy use of that in the replication and migration validation context. Maybe you could just kind of walk through that story, what you've learned from them and why this is a valuable tool.
Yeah. That's a great prompt, Leo. Thanks for asking that. There's one specific example that comes to mind, and I think this was really cool. Where this company, I'm going to abstract it as much as possible. They are a data broker, and so their product is selling you data, essentially, right? In a nice, clean package of saying like, hey, subscribe to us. You can hit us with your API, or you just have direct access through like a query console, right? And they need to make sure that there are multiple kind of backends in order to support those use cases for their customers. Because some people are like, hey, we only want to pay GCP for stuff. Oh, hey, we only want to use Snowflake and Snowflake shares, or we want to use those two come to mind specifically. And they need to make sure those two kind of databases are in sync. And so what they do is they rely on our monitoring function just to make sure like, hey, like when we sync data using our custom data loader or some out of the box connectors, that BigQuery to Snowflake is in sync at all times. And if not, like what are the thresholds of what's a warning difference versus a bad breaking difference, and then take it from there. Versus a lot of times they had to write random custom queries and account for all these edge cases. Now, like they just don't have to think about that because we do all of that plumbing behind the scenes. And it's one of those things like people ask like or think like, hey, can't we build this on our own? Yeah, you probably can for like 95% of use cases. But where it's really, really, really hard is the long tail, where it's the 5% of random edge cases. Hey, how do we account for like partially null composite keys? And you're like no one wants to do that for free, right? And so we make sure we're accounting for every nuance under the sun when it comes to cross-database diffing. And that's why it's so powerful, because it's like, oh, hey, did Datafold think of that random 0.001% case where I want to see data diffs look and feel like this versus that, like casting data types a certain way, right? We thought of that, and you get to move on with your life, right? So
yeah, so I can add a little bit as well around a couple customers I've been working with on a similar story, but I see Jeff has a question. So that should be pretty nuts and bolts to answer. So I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah, do it.
So we do integrate with GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, I think Bitbucket. Yes, Bitbucket. And that in the GitHub case, Jeff, it could be a GitHub action, or there's an out-of-the-box integration with dbt Cloud. So the GitHub action is pretty straightforward. There's a Datafold SDK that is installed, and then we receive DBT manifest files at 2 times. One during your production run, where the production data is built, and then also during the CI run. There's any flavor under the sun of how exactly that's set up. So we work with customers on their exact implementation. If you use dbt Cloud, you can bypass GitHub Actions and CI YAML pretty much altogether. About half of our customers who use the CI integration use dbt Cloud. The other thing I want to point out for anyone who might be wondering is that you can do all this without dbt. So we kind of got started, we got traction in the dbt universe because there was this push for teams using dbt to really use software engineering best practices. So it was a really good space for us to introduce what is a software engineering best practice, regression testing of your data. That being said, the Datafold SDK works the same way. Once it's installed in GitHub, we just need to receive information from, let's say, your Airflow DAG or whatever other orchestrator about which tables to diff. And then a Datafold GitHub application is installed into GitHub or GitLab or whatever tool you're using for version control. So I hope that answers your question. Probably more detail than you were looking for. And then looks like we got another one. How does Datafold perform with enterprise level data? Quite well, not a limitation. As with everything, it'll depend on the resources provisioned in your data warehouse, but there's no cap on our end. We do enable features such as sampling when comparing versions of your DBT model, or filters that can be added to your YAML, not to handle any kind of actual limit, but to just speed up your CI. At the end of the day, no matter what resources you throw at it, it'll be faster if you don't look at every single row of a billions or larger number of rows. But there is an inherent trade-off of rigor versus speed. And so we do enable quite a bit of configurability to like tag specific models as I want to sample this one because it's gigantic and we can tolerate a level of sampling instead of like maximum rigor.
Yeah. And Wesley, if you want to just see a clear technical explanation of why we're faster and we can scale, I just sent you a link to that. So have a look. Feel free to reach out for any questions. Cool. Anyone else? Let's have at it.
While folks are talking, or like your inner monologue is running, please do make use of this time. We'll do our best to answer your questions. We also can schedule more time to chat one-on-one if you have more specific questions you'd rather not put in the chat. But really appreciate those of you who ask questions. It benefits everyone. So appreciate that. I wanted to share, Sun kind of talked through this migration use case he's been working on. I'm working with a couple of customers who are validating a migration from legacy to new database systems. So it's not so much the continuous validation that Sung was talking about, but rather they really want to unplug their old system and get everyone to coalesce around the new one and trust it. And until it's really a human problem. Until you've got your stakeholders and users to believe that the new one is valid, then hopefully the fact that it has other advantages, that it's more modern or more performant or being updated or whatever, should be enough to get them to move over. But until they really trust the data, they don't. And so this has unlocked that capability essentially for these orgs. They've been struggling to get their teams to use the new systems to get buy-in to like conclude this years-long migration. And they're able to do that by firing up this cross-database diffing engine and saying the data truly do match. Where they don't, it's for this valid reason. Spot check, if you will, from here, but this is about as good as it gets in terms of having that proof. One other scenario that's come up is working with a customer who actually replicates data from Snowflake to a variety of different data systems for their customers. And so they actually need to, this is more of a continuous use case, they need to prove to their users or their clients that their kind of source of truth, if you think of like a hub and spoke, there's Snowflake at the hub, and then like all these different customers that have different databases, and they're continuously replicating. They want to make sure it all lines up all the time. Both, they need that assurance so that their product is working, but also the customers want some validation as well. So would love to hear if this sparks any ideas on your end, if there's like some need that you have. I find that most organizations I work with are either trying to establish that like two different databases within their own infrastructure match, or like on a continuous basis, or they are trying to unplug a legacy system and declare migration complete. So food for thought. Appreciate anything you might share. And again, if you have questions about that use case, feel free to ask or schedule time. Anything else about that or the kind of the CI validation that Sung walked through?
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you folks have column level lineage today across your DBT models and things like Looker, Tableau, or High Touch?
I think there are, a lot of tools out there providing lineage of various flavors and degrees of quality. We try to provide something unique by connecting to all these downstream BI apps on the column level. I find that when I'm developing in Looker, which is usually where I spend my time on BI, thanks, Darcy. I have been able to debug stuff actually by, if something is breaking in a dashboard, it can be pretty hard to know where that's coming from. Someone else may have written LookML, and it's just not clear to me how this connects back to the warehouse. So being able to actually click up through, like from the field in Looker, and eventually get to a table that I can poke around in SQL, sort of see what's missing, see what's not. That's where I find the connection of column level lineage to the BI layer to be pretty useful. Another thing worth pointing out, Sung, I don't know if you mentioned this, sorry if I missed it, but I'll just repeat it anyway, that our column level lineage is going to pick up stuff outside of the DBT project. So of course that is true if you don't use DBT, but if you do, you might also have tables off to the side that need to be that need data governance too, maybe more actually than your DBT project. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'll wait for, looks like Jeff is typing about, oh yeah, great question. So it is not at all dependent on DBT exposures. That's probably something we should lead by saying, because for those of you who don't know, DBT exposures requires you to basically manually hard code define what the downstreams are. And then of course the benefit is it pops up in your DAG. But the drawback is that it really requires you to just do the whole thing manually. So it's like a nice way of organizing it, but there's nothing automatic about it. And it does just account for renaming.
We rely on the metadata API for that. And just to expand on that earlier question, when I worked at DBT Labs, exposures was, I think, a nice idea. But it didn't. The real problem you want to solve for that is like you want something to automate that plumbing for that column level lineage across your data apps and your Snowflake models. And so what's really nice is we've seen customers just like throw away their exposures because they don't need them anymore. They don't even have to be tempted by that subject just because we handle it much better automatically and with a lot more fidelity. And then, yeah, that's about. And if you're wondering, like, hey, how does it keep in sync with everything across things like Snowflake and Looker? We use query history and metadata across both, and then we marry the two, and that's how you get that full mapping across columns. That's it. Cool. With that in mind, I'll leave a lull for 20 seconds if there are any more questions, and then if not, we're going to end early and respect everyone else's time and energy. All right? Cool. With that in mind, oh, Jeff is typing. Yeah, sure thing. And then, actually, give me a sec. If you ever want to meet with either of us, I will drop you a calendar link, and then we'll take it from there. Give me one moment as I look for that. And bookmark that, talk with us, and one of us will show up. All right? All right, then. Peace out, y'all. Have a great Thursday. Bye.
Thanks,